Coming up on Fox 4 Sports Watch, the college football season is almost upon us. Phil Steele of Phil Steele's College Football Preview magazine will go over the chances this year's national championship will go to a team in the Lone Star State. Fox 4 Sports Watch, here we go.
You're listening to Fox 4 Sports with Edward Egros.
Welcome to a special edition of Fox 4 Sports Watch, your podcast for Fox 4 Sports. I am Edward Egros. Many college football teams will begin fall workouts in the next few days, and the season gets underway in roughly a month. TCU has its highest expectations ever. Baylor is in the mix, and the Big 12 may be improving its reputation significantly. To talk about these points and more, joining me is Phil Steele of Phil Steele's College Football Preview magazine. On Thursday, Ohio State announced 4 suspensions: Joey Bosa, Jalen Marshall, Dontre Wilson, and Corey Smith. And it's interesting that this announcement comes the same day the preseason Coaches Poll comes out, with Ohio State at number 1 and TCU at number 2. If you were to revise anything based upon these suspensions, do you still feel like Ohio State is the top team in the country, or is there an opportunity for TCU to surpass them because of the big names that Ohio State will be losing for a game?
Yeah, I think Ohio State's clearly still the top team in the country. They were a massive favorite for the game against Virginia Tech, and as high as I am on Virginia Tech this year, when I look at Ohio State and their ability to overcome these losses for one game, they should be in pretty good shape. They've got good depth at defensive end with Jalen Holmes, Sam Hubbard, and Jason Cornell, 3 guys that could step in and fill in Bosa's shoes. And then filling in at those H-back slots, they've got some players there, including Braxton Miller. And Braxton Miller now almost benefits from these guys being out, because during the month of August, he would have been receiving maybe second-string, third-string reps. Well, they're going to want to get him ready for the game, so he'll be getting first-string reps all August. He'll be able to start the game, and he's one of the most dynamic playmakers in college football. So I think whereas Ohio State, the number in Las Vegas may drop on it, they'll still be a pretty good-sized favorite for the game.
So let's talk a little TCU now. A lot to love about this team coming into 2015. Trayvon Boykin certainly has a lot of Heisman qualities, and having a top 10 receiving core with Josh Doxson and this offensive line, that certainly helps his cause to possibly take the Heisman this year, right?
Absolutely. And, last year everybody asks me every year, they go, Phil, who's your favorite team? And I go, it's whoever I picked higher than everybody else. Well, TCU was my favorite team in the country last year because I had them as my number 1 most improved team in the magazine in the front. And I also actually listed them in my surprise team category. I had them my number 4 surprise team in the country, which means they were a non-top 10 team I thought could contend for a national title. A lot of folks looked at me funny when they found that out, but at the end of the year, TCU just missed out on making the playoffs. Now, a lot of it came on the conversion of the offense. Doug Meacham brought in the brand-new Texas Tech-style offense, and there were big-time question marks. Will Trayvon Boykin move to wide receiver? Can they find a replacement? Can they get the quarterback that's perfect for the offense? And it turns out Trayvon Boykin was the man. 6'2", 205, threw for nearly 4,000 yards, 33 touchdowns, just 10 interceptions on the year. And now they've got 10 starters back on offense and great speed at receiver. You look at Colby Listenby and Cameron Eccles-Looper. These are guys that are stars on the track team that can also play wide receiver, and they're more football players than they are track guys. The offensive line, led by Joey Hunt at center, is one of the top offensive lines in the country. So they're going to be potent. Biggest question mark is at linebacker, where the entire unit is gone. But as Patterson pointed out, last year's linebackers ran a 4.8 and a 5.0. This year, their top 5 linebackers all run 4.5. They actually have more speed at the linebacking position. And this is a team where when you factor in the schedule this year, they figure to be possibly favored in every game. The toughest ones are at Oklahoma State, at Oklahoma, and home to Baylor. And ironically, it all happens in the month of November. November is going to be a big month in the Big 12.
Absolutely, and I want to touch upon that just a little bit, but talking a little TCU in terms of their projection possibly to make the playoff this year, what's interesting is that I look at a lot of your analytic models concerning net turnovers, close net wins, and some of the others, and they suggest that TCU may be about the same, maybe even less fortunate as they were a season ago, yet if you look at traditional thinking, well, they had a fantastic season last year, and they bring just about everybody back. You would suspect that TCU could very well win it all. Kind of how do you resolve these two almost seemingly opposing factors?
Yeah, in fact, what I have is a board that gives me the red thoughts and the green thoughts, red being bad and green being good. A lot of red on TCU's page. They went from 4-8 all the way up to 12-1 last year. Generally, my stock market indicator would say, hey, teams that made that big of a climb usually have a little bit comeback the next year. The plus turnover margin of plus 18 last year, that's been something that's been in the magazine since 1995. Teams that benefit from double-digit turnovers 70% of the time have a weaker record the next year. Now, that's not 100% of the time, though, so that's still in TCU's favor. But a lot of indicators, as you pointed out, are saying TCU should have a weaker record. But you do factor in the 15 returning starters. You factor in the schedule this year, and I think TCU has a great shot at winning all their games this year. Gary Patterson did point out to me when I talked to him this spring is that last year they actually only left the state of Texas twice. This year they're doing it 6 times. So there's no easy games out there, and they go from being the hunter to the hunt dead this year. So there are a couple of possible slip-up spots. You look at Kansas State, you look at that at Oklahoma State game later in the year. They lost their last trip there. You look at that at Oklahoma game. That game came down to the wire last year, and that was at home. Now they got to play them on the road, and then, of course, the big one against Baylor. But I think if Baylor's your biggest game of the season, I like TCU's chances there because it's their final home game. Baylor's playing their 3rd road game in 4 weeks. Baylor doesn't play as well on the road as they do at home, and it's on a short week.
And let's get into Baylor for just a little bit. A lot of prognosticators say that this is going to be perhaps the game of the year, TCU and Baylor. As far as the Bears are concerned, Corey Coleman, Katie Cannon, fantastic offensive line with Spencer Drango and Blake Muir. 5th best defensive line, according to some of your numbers, Sean Oakman, Andrew Billings. In terms of Baylor's possibilities, is 12-1, 13-0, something like that, pretty much the likeliest outcome for them, kind of the expectation perhaps down in Waco?
I think it is, and it probably should be, because when you look at Baylor, they're a team that has 9 returning starters on offense and 9 on defense. And yes, they have to replace their quarterback, Bryce Petty. But remember, Bryce Petty in his first year as a starting quarterback was first-team Big 12, and one of the best quarterbacks in the country. I expect nothing less than that with Seth Russell this year. You're talking about a guy that's 6'3", 220 pounds. He can make all the throws on the field. In fact, wide receiver Coleman said he was the best thrower he had ever seen, and they've had some pretty good quarterbacks there while he's been around. He's also a dangerous runner. He's got 4.48 speed. Could bring back a little remembrance of RG3 when he was running around with Baylor's offensive quarterback. He's throwing to one of the best set of receivers in the country. He's got dynamic running backs behind him, and my number 6 rated offensive line. So Baylor is going to have a downright explosive offense. Now, you don't usually equate defense and Baylor in the same sentence, but you might be able to do that this year. They've got as you touched on, Edward, they've got my number 5 rated defensive line. The linebackers and DBs both rank in my top units in the front of the magazine. And there's talent throughout the defense. A couple of good cornerbacks with Xavier Howard and Ryan Reed, 2 guys that got their feet wet last year and are now veterans. And this is a very good Baylor team. I expect when November rolls around, and you look at this team statistically, they're probably the best team in the country statistically heading into November. The most yards on offense, the biggest difference between offensive and defensive yards and points, they'll be right at the very top. Now, my question mark does come in November. They have to play Kansas State on the road to open up the month. Then they play Oklahoma at home. Then they play Oklahoma State on the road. Remember the last time they traveled to Oklahoma State, ironically, they were number 3 in the country. They were favored by 8.5 points to win the game, and Oklahoma State waxed them 49-17. Then, after playing that Oklahoma State game on the road, 6 days later they have to play TCU on the road. And if they do pull the upset on the road against TCU, 1 week later they have to play Texas. So that's a brutal November. There's nobody in the country that plays a November schedule like Baylor does. But the talent is there, where if you told me that at the end of the year they were 11 or 12 win team, I wouldn't blink an eye, because they are very talented.
The 3rd team in the Big 12 that is getting a lot of recognition is Oklahoma. Now, you have them as a surprise team. I completely agree with you there. I mean, Samaje Perine is a real talent. 2nd team offensive All-American, according to you. Alex Ross, people are going to remember that name. Kick returner, 1st team special teams All-American. Schedule for the Sooners is favorable in spots, and as you put it, you should never, ever underestimate a Bob Stoops team when they are in a quote-unquote rebuilding year, right?
Yeah, and Coach Stoops is getting a lot of flack for always coming below expectations, but it's tough to go above expectations when you're always a preseason top 5 team at the start of the year. There's not a lot of room to go up to a ceiling there. When you look at Oklahoma, since 2000, there's actually only been 2 years where they were not ranked in the preseason top 10. And in those 2 years, they finished number 1 in the country and number 6 in the country. So he's right where he wants to be. He's laying in the weeds. Nobody's talking about Oklahoma. Now, the offense is going to look a lot different this year. Lincoln Riley comes over from East Carolina, and he is bringing in the air raid, Texas Tech-style passing attack. That's why I projected Baker Mayfield as a starting quarterback this year, provided his shoulder is healthy. I think he wins the job. Now, that should give P. Ryan a completely different offense. Last year, they were more of a run-based offense. This year, he'll have a lot more open spaces to run to. And can you imagine being a linebacker, looking at this 243-pound guy with momentum barreling down at you? That's going to be pretty tough for those linebackers to handle. Then I thought the big reason Oklahoma's offense dropped off late in the year was the loss of Sterling Shepard. Now, you look at this team statistically, Sterling Shepard started 12 games last year. But in reality, he didn't really play in the second half of the year. He'd come on the field for his start, come out of the game after one series, have 0 receptions. Missing Sterling Shepard down the stretch hurt him. Shepard's back this year, so they've got Shepard, they've got P. Ryan, they've got the Texas Tech-style offense, and good players on defense. I mean, Charles Tapper and Devontae Bond up front. You got a guy like Eric Straker at linebacker, Zach Sanchez at cornerback. They have a potential top 15 defense. Their offense could be in the top 10, and I think they have an excellent shot at opening up the season 9-0 when they travel to face Baylor. They get TCU at home. They play Oklahoma State on the road. November's a great month for Big 12. I think I mentioned that once before. I think Oklahoma is a team that's going to be a clear-cut contender, and they're way under the radar.
They absolutely are, which is funny to say for a Bob Stoops team. I mean, we always see them as a top 5, top 10 team, as you said earlier. And what's interesting, too, about the state of the Big 12 is that I think a lot of its reputation had probably the biggest reason going and concerning Baylor and TCU not making the playoff last season. Are you concerned at all that this reputation may be roughly the same, even if Oklahoma is a lot better and Oklahoma State is a lot better, given that you have some of the bottom feeders in the Big 12 kind of still staying where they are?
No, I think the main reason the Big 12 missed the playoffs last year was the lack of a true conference champion. I think the fact that they had 2 co-champs came into play in the final poll. That's why you saw TCU drop from number 3 to number 5 in the final playoff analysis, was because there was no conference champ, and they already said they were going to probably give 25 to 30% to the conference champ. This year, I think the Big 12 will have a conference champ, and I think when you look at the overall talent level, I mean, you could go back to West Virginia and Kansas State, which are picked for 6th and 7th in the league, even Texas Tech, which is picked for 8th, and there's good talent there. Texas Tech is a team that outgained their foes last year by 100-some-odd yards per game, and when you look at Texas Tech, they've got Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, they've got a dangerous offense, and pretty good talent on defense. They bring in a true freshman like Brighton Fahico. They've got Mike Mitchell coming back. So I think the Big 12 is talented top to bottom, with the exception of Kansas, and I believe they will earn a playoff berth. And all that talk about the Big 12 must expand, must go to 2 divisions if they're going to get playoff berths, sort of die down after this season, because I believe firmly that the Big 12 will earn a playoff berth this year.
It is interesting that we are roughly 12, 13 minutes into our conversation, and we have yet to mention the Texas Longhorns. And thankfully, we can do that now. So the Longhorns, other than their secondary, it's hard to find a lot of spots where you can have some real high expectations there. How patient must Longhorn fans need to be for Charlie Strong in his second year?
Yeah, I'm wondering how you got away with that, Edward. Almost 12 minutes in and no Texas, but I tell you what, I think Texas is going to be a much improved team this year. You know, when I see a new head coach come in, like Charlie Strong did last year, and basically say it's my way or the highway, and then all of a sudden you see a ton of people leaving a program. It's almost every day when you turn on the TV, oh, another Texas player has left the team. And it's what it does is it depletes the team a little bit, and usually you have a rebuilding year. Well, that's exactly what happened with Texas last year. Finishing 6 and 7, I don't think is palatable to too many Longhorn fans. But what I see when coaches do that is the second year there's solid improvement. The third year, they turn into conference contenders, and that's exactly what I see with Texas. Now, a lot of it's going to depend on the quarterback play. They've got 2 good guys. Tyrone Swoops and Gerard Hurd are good. They just need to play up to their level. I'm a little concerned about the depth at running back, also the depth at receiver. They lose a lot of their top receivers from last year, including Harrison Shipley. But the offensive line looks solid. The The defense adds in a guy like Malik Jefferson, who's 240 pounds as a true freshman, should be a star right away. And they had a good defense last year. They only gave up 349 yards per game. I think they'll have a good top 15 defense again this year. Offensively, they're going to have to improve, but I do have an underdog at TCU, against Oklahoma, and at Baylor at the season's end. But I can see, and also Notre Dame in the opener, I can see this team getting to 8 or 9 wins this year, showing that improvement. Next year, I think Texas will be one of the primary favorites to win the Big 12.
And as we step outside of the Big 12, we move on to Texas A&M. They have a favorable schedule at times, if you can say anything within the SEC is a favorable schedule. John Chavis comes in, just a fantastic coordinator at LSU, and now A&M gets to reap those benefits. Myles Garrett at defensive end, Josh Reynolds at wide receiver, Speedy Noyle there as well. Great quarterback and wide receiver play can make them a threat in the SEC West, right?
Yeah, they only have 3 true road games this year. They get Arkansas at a neutral spot, Arizona State at a neutral spot, so only 3 true SEC road games this year. In Mississippi, Vanderbilt, which is clearly a winnable game in LSU. That alone should make them a threat. Kyle Allen's battling Kyler Murray at the quarterback spot. I think Allen wins it. But as you touched on, they've got some dynamic receivers. I have the 4th best receivers in the country. The offensive line looks solid with Afidi at the right tackle. He's not your typical A&M number 1 DC tackle, because those guys have all been on the left side of the line, but he is a powerful run guy, 6'5", 325. Defensively, they do return Myles Garrett, and he started as a freshman last year. He had 11.5 sacks. He's bulked up to 260 pounds. He's going to be one of the better defensive playmakers in football. And Chavis is going to have to work a lot of magic. That defense last year gave up 451 yards per game. I see him improved on defense, but only to about the top 50 level. So they're still going to have to outscore some teams. A couple of games are toss-up ones. I see them around the 8 or 9 win level. I think the top 3 teams in the West out there are Alabama, LSU, and Auburn, and I don't quite put A&M into that class yet, especially defensively.
I'll get you out here on this, Phil Steele. I am an SMU Mustang, graduated from there almost 10 years ago, and I am wondering how patient I need to be for Chad Morris to turn things around.
Well, I think Chad's going to show some improvement right away. He was definitely one of the hottest prospects as an offensive coordinator, and he's got decent talent to work with. They've got 16 returning starters this year. Last year, SMU brought in Matt Davis at the end of the year. Now, Matt Davis, we just talked about Texas A&M. He's an A&M transfer. Wasn't really handling the offense, but once he took over, he's a game-day player, and he led that win over Connecticut in the season's final. Also led the team in rushing with 613 yards and proved to be an adequate quarterback. I think he'll show improvement this year. The offensive line, a lot of big shakeups there in the offensive line. The defense will be improved, but there was a lot of ground to make up. Remember, last year's SMU team was actually outgained by 174 yards per game in conference play. So I see them improved. I see them getting up to maybe the 4 or 5 win level this year, but just not quite enough to make my most improved list this year. However, next year, you got to think that they'll be contending for a bowl bid.
Absolutely, and given just how much of an emphasis he's made recruiting locally, it's amazing to think that the previous regime, they were all about recruiting all over the world, and then Chad Morris comes in and says, no, we have all the talent we need in the Metroplex. And it's funny, given how many 2, 3, 4-star guys have started seriously thinking about SMU, and I think the culture change has proven to me that things can turn around within the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's a great point you make, Edward, and I echo those sentiments 100%. I think recruiting in Texas is something you have to take advantage of if you got a team in Texas, because there's a plethora of talent there.
Phil Steele's College Football Preseason Magazine, one of my favorites out there. Make sure to pick up a copy. Phil Steele, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, a lot of fun talking football with you today, Edward.
Again, that's Phil Steele of Phil Steele's College Football Preview Magazine. You can find them on many newsstands. You can also go to his website, philsteele.com, and you can follow him on Twitter, PhilSteele042. Thanks again so much for listening to this special installment of Fox 4 Sports Watch. I am Edward Egros. Take care.
On air, online, and totally mobile, this is Fox 4.